Today, I'm going to be reviewing the Wim Hof method, Activate Your Full Human Potential. It's a really interesting book. It's really about this guy who, from a very young age, was very attracted to kind of the cold. And he goes into a lot of his different techniques and how he's been able to just achieve so much, breaking multiple world records and really defying what a lot of us understand about modern, human physiology and how the body works. So he believes that, a lot of us each have a spiritual soul that is in each of us that needs to be released and experienced. And it's like being constrained by our everyday lives in society. And this really ties into a lot of the stuff that he talks about with his method of, doing a specific kind of breathing, as well as having exposure to the cold, being able to fix a lot of the, more stress related conditions that we're seeing that are like spiking a lot in today's society, including like depression, a lot of different autoimmune disorders, and like anxiety and those types of things where people just feel like they don't have control. And he talks about how this is more like the world induced kind of situation where originally we wouldn't have all these stressors, but because the world has developed as it has, we're stuck with them. And, in his personal life, he definitely had a lot of struggles. Like his first wife, when he had 4 kids, like committed suicide. And that was like a huge, break in his heart and a huge just thing. But he really credits the cold with helping him, stay grounded in those moments and stay focused on just trying to support the family and provide for his children and just keep his head on straight. Yeah. But so like personally, I think this was just a really interesting read because this is actually something you don't find in modern medicine. Like I'm somebody who's, learning to try to become a doctor, and I've never heard of any of this. I think the whole idea is so revolutionary is because he's been shown in different studies to be able to control his body temperature in different parts of his body, and also be able to control and release large amounts of adrenaline or norepinephrine, epinephrine. Yeah. And that's something that, science has told us we just can't control. And so it shows that it's like very power over the mind kind of situation, because this is actually very similar to a very specific kind of meditation done by monks in Tibet. It's called tummo meditation. And apparently in those studies, they've taken monks and they've put them on these like really cold kind of mountains, and they put these wet towels on them. And they're able to use their body to just dry the towel using their own body heat. By just having such a strong mind-body connection, they're able to just control kind of, their minds and things like that. So of course it sounds very skeptical, but Wim Hof has broken multiple world records and has done it with, multiple probes all over him. They've had like temperature sensors, all this stuff. He's stayed in like blocks of ice for extended periods of time, and he's done just crazy feats. So I think it just shows that, it's not just a hoax. He's not just completely making everything up, but it is very complicated in the sense like he does have a very, very strong belief, and that does help with, some aspect of what he's doing here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what he does in the book and kind of my thoughts on it. Now, notice in the book, right? Okay, this guy's not a doctor. Okay, so he's going to say some things that aren't exactly correct. And I'm going to try to, I'm not a doctor either, but I'm going to try to piece through what the actual evidence shows and versus what the kind of claims he makes. So his first foundation for kind of, approaching the cold in this way of just head on, like attacking it, is that he argues that, overcoming the cold has become like a battle against fear, because in our everyday lives, we're taught from a very young age that the cold is bad. You want to stay out of the cold. You want to this and that, right? And he also makes this argument, he extrapolates that because we don't have this cold and that doesn't stimulate our peripheral blood vessels, so these are like the ones in your hands, your feet, etc. He believes that's the reason why we have cardiovascular disease as the number one killer in many countries. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think he has a point in that, like, yeah, there is some benefit of cold exposure that a lot of people aren't probably, getting used to. And also the difference with cold exposure is not like, oh, if you step outside fully clothed in the cold for a little bit, like you need to have skin on skin contact, and it needs to be more intentional. So just if you live in a cold climate won't necessarily mean you're going to get the benefits of this, because you're most likely not running around, half naked in the snow. So that's why I think cold showers are a great way to kind of get that cold exposure. He makes an argument that a cold shower a day would keep the doctor away because he says it's stimulating and fixing our vascular system. He also saying that cold showers will reduce your resting heart rate after 10 days of consecutively doing them, and this will reduce stress because higher heart rate can lead to often more stress. He talks about cold showers giving you more vascular blood flow throughout the body, and this gives you more energy. He really wants you to start with cold showers at the end. So it's kind of like you do your normal shower, even if it's warm. Then at the end, you slowly turn the knob to cold and you wait for like 30 seconds and then maybe get a little colder. And then you can go like 1 minute. And then, but after a couple of weeks, eventually you build up to maybe doing 2 minutes, but you don't do it all at once. And so this will help you, like he's doing cold showers and having cold exposure will condition you to control your body better and make your mind be stronger than your body because you're able to control your vascular response and limit the gas/shock response to the water. Okay. And even like 60 degrees Fahrenheit is actually cold enough to see benefit. So even if you have tap water, kind of water, that's actually just good enough. It's actually pretty good, right? Okay, so I'm going to talk about all the things I understand of what actually happens when you take a cold shower versus kind of what he's saying. So when you take a cold shower, or at least like, look, I've actually been trying this out for the past couple of days, and you step in there. And for me, I've kept it, what you do is you start with it completely in the middle. So it's like not warm, not cold. And that means it's kind of like cold because we're used to always having warm showers. Then you just, start showering and then you slowly turn it to colder. And then you just like do that for like maybe 15, 30 seconds and you slowly turn it a little colder, 15, 30 seconds, and you slowly turn it a little colder, 15, 30 seconds. That's what I've done, right? And what you start to notice is that like your body has a shock response in a sense, which is not like a dangerous shock response because there's actual medical condition called shock, but it's not like that. But you have a minor shock response and then your body's like, whoa, it's cold. And it's kind of like surprised. But it doesn't mean it's bad because what's going to happen is it's going to start to release a lot of this like adrenaline because it's like, okay, we're cold. Let's try to like warm up. Let's try to, stimulate blood flow. Let's try to do all these things, right? And this can be good because it can be like a healthy way to kind of stress test our like immune system and stress test our body, stress test our, like blood flow, all this stuff, which it does sound like, why would you want to test it out? But if you think about it, exercise is the same thing. Like, why would you want to go exercise? Because you're actually stress testing your body. But it's been shown that stress testing your body intentionally in safe and manageable ways is actually a key to really high longevity in a lot of different ways, right? So exercise is stress testing muscles to keep them fit and in shape. It puts, pressure on your bones, all of that. So just like that, cold showers can stress test us in different ways. And there's a lot of different benefits that come from that, including you have a huge spike in dopamine that lasts for at least a couple hours after the cold shower. So actually, if you're doing it like I am in the beginning of the morning, you take a cold shower, you get this huge spike of dopamine. You also have a huge mental resilience factor because it's cold and nobody wants to do anything cold, right? But then also at the same time, you're accessing, let's say, in a sense, your brainstem functions because this is more of a very, if you can think about it, primitive, how do I say this? Like primitive kind of challenge. In that, like back in the long time ago, you would be out there gathering fruits or whatever. Maybe it's really cold, and this would kind of be a more natural stimulus, right? So as a result, your body's like used to this, and it's like it's seeing this and knows what to do. And it's good to have this exposure because we just don't typically get it. And so after you're done, right, you have a lot of boosts of energy because obviously you're more awake, but also you have a lot of dopamine, right? So you feel really good actually, even though it's like difficult in the moment. You also have the mental resilience factor of knowing that you did something hard in the beginning of the day. So that's amazing for compounding and just improving stuff. You also have, it's been shown that the boost of adrenaline can temporarily reduce your immune response, which can be good in helping you manage your stress resilience and also manage your immune system better. And this can become very useful for people who have autoimmune disorders because it might help them, not in all the cases, but sometimes it could help them have a lower immune response because in those situations, they have too elevated of immune response. Like their immune response kind of going crazy in a sense. It's doing way too much compared to the actual threat. So I think that's a huge benefit of that as well. And so I think one of the really shocking things is that he combines kind of this cold exposure with the mind in that he's been shown to control skin temperature and increase it by like 5 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit while he was wearing a vest that was filled with cold water, that was circulating cold water on his skin. And the skin right on his vest, he was able to increase it above what it normally would be for that temperature. And this really shocked, the researchers because these are typically not consciously can be controlled, right? And This is something only very trained monks can do with their mind, and he credits the ability to the cold's ability to connect with his mind better. He says the cold allows him to kind of connect with his mind and lets him focus. So like I think this is just important because a lot of times people, say, oh, this person's just crazy, this and that, this and that. It's been shown he's able to actually reproduce this with other people because he can train them and they can do the same exact thing. So there's nothing genetic about him. And the fact of the matter is, it's like, wow, maybe as, the field of medicine, we should think about how powerful the mind is and how we can use that for good, because this is obviously very powerful. I don't know if you know this, but a lot of allergic responses, right? If you're, let's say, allergic to a peanut, you eat a peanut and you start like having issues breathing. Well, that's kind of due to an overreactive immune system. And as a result, what's the solution? Well, they ask you to, they give you these EpiPens. What are EpiPens? It's just epinephrine, which is the same as like adrenaline, right? So you're just injecting adrenaline. So it's kind of like if you can better control your own adrenaline, right? Like you could, I'm not sure this is exactly how it works, but you could probably fix some of that aspect of that allergy, right? And so there's a lot of theories as to why allergies are on the rise now, but you could view this as maybe one reason because we've lost the ability to kind of control our stress response. And also this can be a great way to ground yourself in the beginning before you have a long day of work, or some way to just kind of allow you to control some aspect and feel that control. Then he goes off, I think, a little bit on a deep end, but he talks about how you can use breathing to get a psychedelic experience. His breathing method, pretty much, like, even though he claims that it circulates oxygen better, and again, I personally don't really recommend his breathing method. I recommend more just getting some cold exposure because I think that's something very easy for everyone to do, low-hanging fruit, and I think there are real benefits to it. His breathing method is pretty much making you hypoxic in the sense like you end up breathing off a lot of your carbon dioxide, right? And so theoretically, you'd be like, oh, wow, that means I have much higher oxygen levels. Well, the problem is if you studied kind of any sort of physiology, you would know that carbon dioxide and oxygen transport and delivery throughout the body, they need each other because of the way that those two molecules bind to hemoglobin. So when you're in the complete absence of carbon dioxide, a couple of different things happen. One, your blood pH begins to become more basic, which is then a signal to the brain that, oh, that means we don't need to breathe as much just because it only uses carbon dioxide as a way of like, measuring if you need to breathe. And then this can become a problem because then if your oxygen levels go down, then like you don't have a drive to breathe and you could easily pass out. So this is why you kind of have to be very careful with this. And then he talks about psychedelic experience. Well, the reason is because it's known that when you have low levels of oxygen, you pretty much start seeing visions and lights and things like that, right? And that can be often attributed to having some sort of psychedelic experience because you're just being hypoxic and your brain is not receiving enough oxygen. Now, because of the fact that his breathing method is making you have low levels of oxygen for a short amount of time, it's not a big deal. Like it won't cause brain damage because it's fine. But there is the risk of like you actually passing out, which is why I feel like, in my opinion, if you just did normal meditation, I think you'd be okay. You don't need to do his crazy kind of breathing. But I will say that his breathing might be useful if you need a hard reset. That's the only situation I think that it might be useful, because it's been shown that in these really hypoxic situations, you can have this massive surge of adrenaline, like even more than the cold shower. They did a study. They had someone lying down doing his breathing method, and that person had more adrenaline released than somebody who was bungee jumping for the first time. And of course, adrenaline is supposed to be kind of a fear response situation, right? So if you're releasing more adrenaline than somebody who's bungee jumping for the first time, right, that's a crazy amount. And it does show that there is some conscious control. And so I think that, maybe if you're in a very extreme situation where you've tried a lot of medications, you're in a very, very, again, this is not health advice, please go to see a doctor, but I'm saying if you're on the edge and you have a lot of problems and you have no hope, then maybe you should try it. But I just don't really think it's that helpful for the average everyday person, in my opinion. He also makes, back to the low levels of oxygen, right? There's lights and visions. The reason why we know that this could actually is correlated because in near-death experiences, people see a lot of lights and visions, and in near-death experiences, you typically have very low levels of oxygen going to the brain, and that that kind of provides this psychedelic-like effect. He also claims you can naturally release DMT using the breathing method, but this is not true because it's been shown that DMT is typically in very, very low concentrations, and it wouldn't be able to just suddenly rise to have that large of an effect and for you to actually like feel it. So yeah, I think like you have to understand that like when he does these camps and stuff and he talks about all these experiences, there's like definitely some truth to it, but there's also a lot of like the guru effect, which is where people believe in something because it's so well known and for nothing else, and their power of belief can shape outcomes. There's also like kind of groupthink where if you do these sessions with other people, you can become very influenced. I'm not saying this is completely not useful, but I'm just saying that like there are caveats to this and you can't expect everything he's saying to be completely correct, right? And this is with anything in life, right? Most times when people make very extreme claims, you can take half of the claim and probably assume half of that is right, and then do your own research for the rest of it. He makes his claim that breathing more and like having more alkalytic pH would, it is like the healthy range. I completely disagree. Like that's not good because if you have very alkalytic basic pH for long periods of time, which you won't be able to do with breathing, but it's just, there's no better pH. I definitely disagree with that. Like just because you get rid of more carbon dioxide does not mean there's like a better outcome, And then he also uses breathing method to actually help with acclimatization. So this is where they were able to climb Kilimanjaro. It was him and some inexperienced hikers were able to climb Kilimanjaro in 28 hours. And so the reason why this works is because the breathing pattern increases the resilience to hypoxic or low oxygen environments because you're stimulating that kind of hypoxia, right? And then it can also lead to a large surge in adrenaline, which is known to improve circulation, and that can help you distribute more oxygen after you stop being so hypoxic. And so that's just like they're kind of creating, in a sense, like high altitude environment in their body when they do these breathing methods. And therefore it can kind of cause them to be better prepared for it. And also it can, because the high epinephrine levels will reduce inflammation as well, at least temporarily. And so that can help reduce a lot of the acute mountain sickness symptoms you might see. Another interesting thing was a big application he talked about for arthritis and how arthritis can actually, you can remove the pain and these kind of things, right? So he has a lot of stories about how somebody was able to do his breathing method. They're like 60 something years old, and then they're able to do 20 push-ups right after, and they've never done 20 push-ups. Pretty much the reason is when you get that hypoxic, a lot of your limbs start to tingle a little bit because of just, not receiving enough oxygen. And as a result, you also get a lot of endorphins are released. And so you have muted pain receptors. And as such, they're able to kind of, not feel as much pain, which I think is also a very interesting aspect of this is like, how could we use this to, reduce pain in individuals instead of giving them pills, which I think is really cool. But, yeah, you need to understand that the arthritis is not the root problem is not really being fixed in this sense. It's more like they are just using this method and it's removing a lot of the pain that they're noticing. And that's allowing them to actually do push-ups because usually the pain would stop them from being able to do push-ups. But because they're so hypoxic and there's a lot of endorphins released, they're in this state where they feel like they don't have as much pain or they don't experience as much. And therefore they're able to do more athletic feats. And then also his breathing method can help with hangovers a little bit because it will reduce inflammation, like we mentioned, and it can reduce how acidic the blood becomes because if you think about it, what are we doing? They're breathing off a bunch of carbon dioxide, so that increases the blood pH, and alcohol, typically when you drink a bunch of it, it will acidify your blood, and therefore it can help with some of the symptoms. But note that for hangovers, the limiting factor is how fast your body can break down the alcohol and just get rid of it out of the system. So this would not affect any of that fundamental reason why you have a hangover. It can just help with some of the symptoms. Yeah. So I think this book is really, interesting in the sense that it's not completely true, right? Don't expect it as 100% truth, but I think that it has the cold exposure side, I think really has huge benefits that I would especially because it's so easy to take a cold shower and just not a fully cold shower. You just start off maybe warm and end it with just 30 seconds of cold, right? It's very easy to do that. And the benefits are definitely there. His breathing method is interesting, but I think personally I'm a bit skeptical of how necessary it is unless you're in in a really extreme situation where you maybe have a lot of complicated conditions and things like that. Maybe it could help hard reset your body. But I will also look into just normal meditation breathing practices because I feel like that might be potentially safer and potentially give you the same results as well. If you have any other questions or want me to review any books, put them down below. Otherwise, subscribe for more, and I'll see you in the next video.